Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Olive Tree. I'm Julia Fisher and my guest is Maayan Shoshani, who works in Tel Aviv in Israel with Jews for Jesus. Maayan, you have shared your experience of establishing a home for women struggling with drug addiction and prostitution in Tel Aviv, you and a team of others. So I'd love to talk to you now about how you come to be doing what you're doing. Perhaps we could tell your story on this program. You were born in Israel, right? Your parents are both Jewish. Tell me about your early life.
So I was born right outside Jerusalem in a small city called Maayan, which is actually where I grew up most of my life. And my parents are both believers in Jesus, both Jewish. So we grew up in a city that's very secular, but also kind of traditional Jewish. And coming into that city and studying in those schools with those people, we celebrated all the Jewish holidays, but I always knew who Jesus was from a very, very young age. But as a child, that is very hard to share. And sometimes you don't understand fully what that means. What does faith mean? What does truth mean? And how do you share that with other kids? So it was very challenging at times, but I always remember from a very young age just knowing who Jesus is and what that meant, but not so much as a personal level as a young child. And actually, when I was around 8 years old, my dad became a pastor in a congregation. He was an engineer, and he became a pastor. And when that happened, that kind of changed things for our family and what happened to be our day-to-day life. So I remember always from that age on, people always coming in and out of our house, people staying at our house to live with us for seasons, different short periods. So I just always remember having an open door and people always coming in and out of our house, and my parents always having people over.
And you're one of a large family, aren't you, as well?
Yeah, we're 7 children altogether.
So a busy household.
Yeah, a lot of noise and joy.
Noise and joy. Presumably you went into the army like every young Israeli has to do. What sort of an experience was that like for you?
So I was an infantry instructor in the army, which meant I worked with combat soldiers. And that was very hard, also because it challenges you with things you've never experienced before as an 18-year-old. You're not with your family, you're not with your friends, you're far away from home for weeks or months at times. So it was very challenging just to find who I am, what my faith is. It's kind of like rebuilding your roots and seeing where you come from and just rethinking all of that. Because you're just stripped away from anything else at that point in life. So it was very challenging. And just being an instructor for a class full of men and working with girls who did the same job. So it was very intense, and it brought up a lot of questions for me, just as to my identity and what I'm doing and what my faith is. So it was very challenging.
How hard is it being a young Israeli when you look at young people in the rest of the world who don't have to live in a land where there is quite a lot of unrest and where you're obligated to go into the army as a defense force? Are there times where you wish you could just live anywhere else but Israel?
No, I I've thought that many times when I was younger that it would just be easier to leave, get up and leave, and go live somewhere else where it's peaceful, like Switzerland, beautiful. Um, but I think just for me, this is where I need to be, and I really believed that just, especially doing what I do, it's speaking to people who grew up in the same area or who have been through similar experiences going through the army or being here. It's just so much easier to refer to and talk to people about it. It's who I am.
Now, you mentioned that your father, when you were 8, became a pastor, and your mother's a very strong believer as well. But for you to actually have your own faith and come to your own conclusions, that's a different story altogether. What made you want to become a believer and then eventually join Jews for Jesus?
So actually, after my army service, like I mentioned, I had a lot of questions. And at my army service, I kind of tried to find my own way of faith, tried to look in different directions, see what's out there, see what different people believe, what works for me and what doesn't. And after my army service, when I got out of the army, I was very, very confused. I found no answers anywhere else and anywhere I looked. And I was very also broken, just being so torn on the inside and searching and not finding any answers. And actually, after my army service, talking about leaving Israel, I went to Africa for 3 months to a Bible school there. And it was kind of my last chance. And I said, this is either the truth or it's not. And I can't live this way anymore, not knowing what's right and what's wrong. And there I studied through the whole Bible. And each day I would just sit for hours and read and get to know what it says and what the truth is. And it was like I was relearning everything I've known, but I actually understood what that meant. It's a personal relationship with God and what that means and why there is a Messiah and why God and why Jesus came to earth to be for us and give us a way for a personal relationship with God. And that really, really changed my life, just knowing all of that on the most personal level a person can. And I came back to Israel, and I worked in downtown Jerusalem for a season in a bakery. And I remember just always talking to the homeless people. They would come in at 6 a.m. when I would open up, and I would just always talk to them. There was this one guy who I'd always give a muffin, and we would talk. And I remember just always seeing, even since I was a kid and a teenager, I would volunteer. I used to volunteer in a mental hospital as a teenager with a few friends. So just remember always seeing these people who were considered so unseen in some way to society, people who you don't really know how to approach or how to talk to, and just always wanting to share and talk to them and be there for them. So after that season, I started volunteering with Jews for Jesus in a project they were doing in Jerusalem. And we were renovating houses that belonged to that homeless people in Jerusalem were giving by the municipality. And after that project, actually, a friend of mine who was working in Jews for Jesus came and asked me if I wanted to do that for the long term, not realizing that she was talking about a job. But yeah, she asked me if I wanted to do something like this, just bigger in Tel Aviv, where there are a lot of homeless people and just so much work to do. So after that, I knew that was immediately the answer because I've been looking for exactly something like that, just seeing those people in such need. And that was almost 4 years ago. And then I moved to Tel Aviv and I started working with Jews for Jesus.
Maayan, you've shared your story. Born in Israel, your parents are believers, you've been through the army, you've found yourself having been very, very lost. I'm now going to ask you the question that's behind all of these programs, really. What do you believe God is doing in Israel at this time? You mentioned that it's very hard to be a believer. It's very challenging. There aren't that many of you. Your identity is very much, you have to wear your heart on your sleeve so people know what you believe there. So what's the bigger picture?
It's hard for me to say. I feel so small answering that question. But I think as God is really moving. Just now, even I'll share a short story, but just now I was taking a taxi with a friend to get here. And we started talking to the taxi driver about just who Jesus was and who God was. And he was saying how he knew Jesus was a Jew and that he came for the Jewish people, first of all, but he still doesn't believe in him. But I think God is doing something great and he is moving hearts. And I think this is a season like never before. After COVID and after Corona and after so much time of social distancing, I think God is doing something really great for those who still have strength to go out and meet in person and talk to people. And I think people are really, really thirsty for truth and they're thirsty for relationships and hearing something more. And I really, really see that also both on the streets and both with just people I talk to, with non-believing friends I have. We just really see that there's this deep need for human contact, for truth, for depth, like something I've never seen before. Really just a season of people searching. And I think it's a time for us to really speak up because I feel like we've found truth and I've found hope beyond anything else in this life. And I think it's really the time to speak up and share with people.
How big an effect do you think COVID had on the psyche of Israeli people?
I think it really distanced people. I think both social media and Corona combined all together really just puts people alone in their own houses with not a lot of human contact. We have Zoom, we have here, look, see, we are on a video call right now, but we have all these platforms, and I think it really distances people into just being in their own cocoon and living on their own. And I really see that in Tel Aviv as well, that there's a lot of young single people who are so lonely and just desperate for that. So I think Corona just made that feeling stronger for people who feel lonely, who feel alone, just distancing each of us from the society that we've known before.
So you're seeing these difficulties that COVID has thrown up as an opportunity. You're very much seeing it as a positive opportunity, that people are ready to talk and ready to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. It's still very challenging times because we feel like we're not out of that season yet of COVID, still with the restrictions. But I think it is an opportunity really to speak up and find and do something different.
Maayan, thank you very much for sharing your story, and we wish you well with your work on the streets with the women in Tel Aviv. Maayan, thank you.
Thank you.
The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please visit our website, olivetreefund.org. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.